Hey, Grant here. I wanted to talk through the Epic Hide the Security Policy project and automate permissions. I met with Camellia this morning, and we did some work to better break down the plans around this and some similar issues like the work that we've been discussing around improving linking and scoping of policies. So we're trying to get things organized, get a better sense of each of the iterations, and I wanted to walk through that today. So just kind of revisiting what we want to accomplish in general, what the problem is to solve. It's mostly focused about confusion around the concept of a security policy project. Right now, users have to understand a lot about GitLab as a whole, how are security policy projects linked, and then from there, how do we ensure we have the right scope applied? When are policies enforced? When are they not? So trying to understand that, as well as the hierarchy and the permissions, and all of this can be pretty complicated to ultimately answer questions about compliance and security and understanding where policies are actually enforced. So as a result of all of the changes that we've documented here, there are going to be a number of benefits. For one, policy creators will be able to more intuitively create and enforce policies based on their access and permissions. Policy creators will be able to complete the task of creating and updating policies without having to have all of this additional context. They'll be able to, they will only need to think about how to scope policies. They will not have to think about scopes and links. They'll have a better understanding of the history of the policy changes and exactly what's being impacted by the policies they've created. And they will be given better context of the access and permissions around the policy management. So I've updated each of the iterations here. First, what we're working on is completing some UX research. So some of the feedback that we capture from that could feed into some of the plans that we have. But I think we're getting very close, and I don't suspect much will change, but we'll certainly see what we learn from users from that research. What we plan for the first iteration is, could be kind of looked at standalone, but as it benefits the broader plans that we have here, I wanted to include it. That first iteration is adding groups to security policy scopes. So today, policy scoping is targeting projects in a given group, as well as projects containing a certain compliance framework label. And this issue will focus on also allowing you to add a group or a subgroup into the scope. And what you'll see is this also helps with the additional iterations we have in this plan, as it will map very closely to what linking does today, technically speaking, but with a more transparency in the actual policy YAML and more capabilities to manage that from the same place to granularly refine the policy scope. So I think this will line things up and really prepare us for the next iterations. In iteration 2, this is the change that will help to really consolidate the concepts of linking and scoping. So one of the first changes here is actually modifying how links actually work by default. And what we've seen is how we reference this today is the default mode. But instead of enforcing all of the projects by default, if there is no scope, what we would change is to make linking more of a mechanism to determine which groups, subgroups, or projects are enforceable. So by having a link by default, we would not enforce a policy. It would just mean that if we apply a scope, that we can reach into those groups, subgroups, or reach to that project and begin to enforce it if the scope is applied. So let's see, instead of requiring policy creators to create links in every group individually, this will also allow them to do this in one step. They'd be able to create the policy, apply a scope, and ensure that the policies are enforced without having to go into each group, each subgroup or project and edit the policy project link and apply that. So this will make it a much simpler workflow for the policy creator based on their permissions and access. We already do have a custom permission now that exists thanks to our authorization team, which is managing security policy project links. So what we would advise, such as in our documentation to our various customers, is that they would leverage this permission. They could apply it to users with say a reporter role, and then give them the ability to also manage these links, and then apply those users or give those users access in this custom permission in the groups that they want them to be able to manage. So if they have this permission and we complete iteration 2 here, they could complete the entire workflow, complete their task from the policy screen. We would want to keep in mind that this change in the default behavior of a policy project link could impact existing customers or the existing behavior for customers. So we need to think about exactly how we want to implement this. This could entail having some type of migration for converting from a link to just leveraging the scopes, or there might be some other flow that we want to consider for kind of opting in to this new behavior and changing from the linking workflow. And I'll note that this does depend on the first iteration, as we need the context to map linking and scoping, so that we have to have a way to scope groups, subgroups, and projects all together in the scope. Moving on, the next iteration will focus really on the workflow of creating a policy, merging those policy changes, and then having a clear understanding of what was just accomplished, essentially that primary task of policy creation, policy updating, policy management. So with this change, we'll make it seamless for the user so that they don't actually have to leave the policies tab. The key steps in this flow would be the policy creator visits the policies tab. So if they're in the group, they go to the group policies tab. They make their changes in the policy editor. When they go to merge the change, instead of how it works today, instead of taking them into the security policy project, we'd actually just update the breadcrumbs and give them this experience that they are staying within the policies tab, viewing a new page or tab called the change history tab, and viewing their MR from within that section of the policies screen. So this way they don't have to leave, they don't have to understand what a security policy project is. They can complete their task there. They'd also be able to edit policy YAML screen from the policies editor as well, without having to jump into the security policy project. Once they've made changes, we would take them back to the change history list, and they'd be able to see all of the MRs that have been open for a given policy. So yeah, I'm not going to go into the designs here. I think Camellia will follow up and provide some more GIFs specific to these flows for each of the iterations, or at least reference some of the designs, and we can provide more context on that. But that's where we will end on iteration 3. A separate part of this design is that you'll see in the designs in this epic. We'll split into the separate iteration 4 is the my policy versus inherited policies tabs. With these tabs, we'll differentiate. Today you just get a policy list, but there's no context of like if I'm a policy creator versus if I'm like essentially a consumer where policies are being enforced in my group or project. So with this, regardless of where you are in a group, subgroup, or project, you'll be able to see my policies versus my inherited policies, and be able to see what policies you're able to manage versus those enforced in separate tabs. As a part of this iteration as well, we will improve the information that we provide in that source view. So with the differentiation between my policies versus inherited policies, my policies would not need a source. In the inherited policies, you'll be able to see which policies are enforced on my project, what is the source, where the policy was created, and we'll refine this as well, or improve upon this as well to ensure that we're only showing you policies that are enforced against your project also considering the policy scope. So today there is an issue where you might see policies that are in the linked security policy project, but don't apply to your project. So we want to make sure that we address that in iteration 4 here. And there are a few dependencies that I'm aware of highlighted here. Let me know if I'm missing anything. Iterations 5 and 6, we are continuing to refine. Based on our discussion, we have a few more questions. And so we'll complete the research and flesh this out a little bit more. But what we're expecting for iteration 5 is that we would introduce a permissions tab. And what this would largely do in the policy editor screen is give you a little more context around what can or can't be done by a given user or what have you in the policy section. So who is able to create the policy, who's able to manage or update it, what are the user's roles and permissions, exactly what information we want there, we are going to refine a bit more. But that's what we're expecting for this iteration. And in the meantime, we'll try to address this mostly with documentation. And the last iteration for 6 is trying to complete that step of abstracting away or hiding the security policy project. I like to use the term abstracting because I don't think that we want to eliminate the concept of policy as code, but we do want to allow policy creators to complete their tasks, complete their workflows without having to have all this extra context. So we're still refining exactly what this may look like, but one example idea is to have this policy YAML be more of a hidden GitLab file, to be able to have like a .policy YAML that resides more associated with the group or subgroup versus having a distinct project visible in the tree. And then just making it simpler to manage these policies centrally, granularly from the group and subgroup levels, and eventually from the org level. And speaking of org, I'll note lastly, organizations and managing policies from an org is out of scope of this epic, but it is going to be a last step in terms of improving the UX in management and kind of the goals that we have around this epic. But for self-managed users, I think with GitLab.com, this epic will address most of the confusion. But once we have organizations, we won't have to work around this limitation of trying to enforce from within a group or a subgroup or project across an entire instance, and getting that kind of cross group management, linking and all of that capability in place. We'll be able to just more intuitively have a workflow to manage down from the org level or down in the hierarchy from the subgroup down, etc. But yeah, this piece will be out of scope of this epic, but all the work that we do here will contribute, I think, ultimately to where we're heading for org-wide policy management as well. So yeah, we'll have more to come on specific flows in each of these iterations, but I wanted to at least share our thinking for today. And yeah, let us know if you have any questions, and feel free to reach out in this epic. Awesome, thank you.